Assalamu alaikum. My name is Manzoor Ghori. I am the Executive Director of IMRC and one of the founders. I like to welcome you for ISNA Convention Program of India session. We have three great speakers. Please watch a video before we start our program. Thank you.
Population of Muslims of India is 218 million right now. Out of 280 million, 80% of them are below poverty line. They work hard and they earn less than $1 a day.
Whether it be education, whether it be healthcare, whether it be social welfare, whether it be religious type of work, we are the only ones in states. IMRC is the only organization that is providing complete services from birth to death.
There's no overhead. There's no other charity, to my knowledge, which gives 100% of the donation back.
I would like to now begin our program with our first speaker, Dr. Muqtadar Khan. He has a PhD from Georgetown University and is assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Delaware. He is also the director of the Islamic Studies program and author of several books, including American Muslims, Bridging Faith and Freedom. I now welcome Dr. Muqtadar Khan.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to the ISNA Convention of 2020. This is a special one thanks to COVID. We are doing it virtually. One of the biggest attractions of ISNA Convention is networking. But unfortunately, this year we will not be able to socialize as we usually do at the ISNA Convention. But inshallah, thanks to technology, we will be able to still engage in a meaningful way. I'm extremely grateful to Manzoor Ghori Saab, who has invited me today to speak to you and give you a lecture. One of the lectures that Indian Muslim Relief Charities, IMRC, hosts every year at the ISNA Convention. IMRC is one of the most important Indian American institutions, Indian American Muslim institutions in the US, which has been working and providing relief in India for decades. I cannot say enough about the fantastic work that they do in India. I'm going to be talking to you today about the state of Indian Muslims. Unfortunately, it is perilous, and we will be discussing things which are essentially of great concern to everybody who care about human rights and democracy, but especially for Indian Muslims in the United States whose relatives are potentially exposed to state and civil society related marginalization and oppression to some extent. My game plan for today is very simple. I will talk to you very briefly about Indian Muslims for those of you who are not familiar with the community. And then I plan to talk about their cultural and economic and political marginalization, how there is a cultural erasure of Islam and Muslims taking place in India. I will talk about the lack of security and safety for Indian Muslims in India for their lives and their property. And then I will probably try and make a few suggestions on what we could do for them. So without much ado, Indian Muslims, there are about 185 to 200 million Muslims depending on the kind of estimates. We have census figures from 2011 when it was recorded that there are 172 million Muslims in India. They roughly constitute about 14% of the population of India. I'm going with the most conservative estimate, which puts them at about 185 million. We will know soon when the 2021 census comes out. Only Indonesia and Pakistan have a bigger Muslim population at the moment. Primarily because of the partition of India and subsequent rise of Hindu nationalism and along with it Islamophobia, Indian Muslims have become a subjugated, marginalized and stunted community. And it is the stunted part that I want you to focus on as to how the development and growth of the community is synthetically, artificially or externally stunted. Their lives and livelihoods are not as safe as that of other Indians, and they face discriminatory practices both from the state as well as civil society. As a direct consequence of the growth of what is now widely known as Hindu nationalism or Hindutva. As India strives to become a Hindu nation, a political ideology called Hindutva that seeks to eliminate the distinction between Indian and Hindu is fostering a climate of intolerance towards religious difference, particularly towards the largest minority, which is Muslims. Hindu nationalism is intrinsically Islamophobic. It abhors Muslim distinctiveness and seeks to erase it from the present as well as the past. Hindu nationalism desires the entire nation to suffer from partial amnesia. They would like to forget a 1,000-year past where Muslims were part of Indian culture, and Muslims continue to remain so. Some educated sections of Muslims continue to do well. There is a regional variation in India. Muslims in the south are better educated than Muslims in the north. It is kind of pattern for the whole country, and they suffer less discrimination as opposed to in the cow belt in northern India. But all indications from India suggest that on markers of development, on growth and prosperity, Muslims will continue to suffer in the current political and cultural environment that is becoming increasingly hostile to them. So let's look at some of these numbers. I'm going to list this at the bottom of this video so that you can actually click on the links and see where these sources are coming from. In 2006, the Sachar Commission report, which essentially assessed the state of Muslims in India, really exposed for the first time how backward the Indian Muslim community had become. The word backward is used in India essentially to indicate underdevelopment or economic underdevelopment. It shows that the Indian Muslim community singularly is the most marginalized, impoverished community. Even the so-called backward classes and castes in India are doing better than Muslims. And this was in 2006, and things have only gotten worse since then, especially since 2014, when the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Hindu Nationalist Party, came to power without any coalition. Muslims have the lowest standard of living of all religious groups in India. And when we are talking about standard of living, we are talking about 1,000 rupees a month. That comes to about $15 a month. So a large number of Indian Muslims are living on anything between $150 to $180 per year. That is poverty. That is a difficult amount of money to try and eke out a decent living from. While Muslims are only about 1/6 of the population, 14%, 25% of beggars are Muslim. While Muslims are only 14% of the population, only 3% of the top corporate executives are Muslims, which means that Muslims hardly ever rise in the private sector. Muslims have the lowest rate of enrollment in higher education. In 2019, when the results of the civil services came out, where Muslims do devote a lot of attention, a lot of community resources are spent in training Muslims to apply and compete in the civil services exams, only 45 of the 829 Muslims who qualified of the 829 people who qualified, only 45 of them were Muslims, which means roughly 5% of the incoming class of civil servants in 2019 were Muslims. Muslims constitute about 6% of the police force, and this is an old figure. This was a 2013 figure. After BJP came to power in 2014, this figure is not made public. There's enough reason to believe that even though Muslims are 14% of the population, maybe 3 to 4% of the police force is Muslim, which again is, for those of you in the United States who understand what happens when the police force does not have minorities in it, as to how brutal their tactics can become. Besides this economic and educational marginalization in India, which is essentially contributing to a relative growth of Muslims, which is in the negative, in the sense that while Hindus become more and more educated and prosperous, Muslims continue to lag behind, and this increasing gap of prosperity and development also translates into political gap, which then has cultural implications. In the past 10 years, Muslims are experiencing a strategy by Hindu nationalists which is determined to eliminate the cultural presence of Islam and Muslims in India. They're changing names of cities, like Allahabad has been changed. Landmarks, roads are being renamed. Mosques are being destroyed. The most famous case is that of the Babari Masjid, which existed from around 1500 and some odd years until recently. There is also a spread of utter falsehood and anti-Muslim propaganda which is contributing to Islamophobia, such as the Taj Mahal is a Shiva temple. So there is a lot of these popular and official and unofficial discourses which are trying to rewrite history with the sole purpose of eliminating Muslims from the past and the present. It is really sorry, because this is a kind of violence on somebody's identity and culture. The life and property of Muslims are also in peril. Since the rise of Hindu nationalism, the lives of Muslims are always at risk. Men and women are beaten and lynched in public with cameras running and the police watching, and nobody stops. There have been so many cases of public lynching of Muslims by cow vigilantes and others. Just a hint of accusation that a person has just had a beef burger will get you lynched in India by the streets with the help of police, with cameras watching. Nobody is ever arrested or prosecuted. And sometimes these cow vigilantes also show up with politicians and are garlanded by elected officials. So crime and violence, vandalism is rewarded through recognition. And the fact that the police does not aggressively prosecute these phenomenal hate crimes, literally, is an encouragement for public to indulge in it. If you're sure that you could beat up somebody on the street and kill them, and also confident that the police will not prosecute you, then it is an invitation to be violent. Muslims also suffer from mobs who are unfortunately protected by police. And the police, for example, after the Delhi riots, rather than prosecuting those who incited violence and those who indulged in violence, they were actually filing cases against minorities who have been the biggest victims of such violence. International community human rights organizations are now beginning to take note of it, and every human rights organization in the world, including the State Department's report on human rights and the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, they have all documented in the last 2 years the atrocities that are being committed against Muslims by both the government as well as the population in India. Muslim political influence has been on the decline. Ironically, since the 1960s, where Muslim population was roughly 10%, and now they have grown to about 14%, their population growth in a democracy is not translating into political power. So, for example, the best performance that Muslims have had as far as representation in the parliament, Indian parliament has about 545 members, was way back in 1980, when there were about 10% of the population. So there were maybe 54 or odd members were Muslim in the Indian parliament. By today's percentage of Muslims, there should be 76 Muslims in the Indian parliament, but there are only 5% Muslims. There are about 27 Muslims in the parliament that got elected in 2019. The worst was in 2014, where there were only 23 Muslims in the Indian parliament. So there's decline in Muslim presence in the national parliament is roughly at the same percentage level as Muslim presence in civil services. So there are 5% of the parliament is Muslims, the 5% of the civil services is Muslims, roughly 4 to 5% of the people in the police forces are Muslims. Now what this really does is that if you're not in the government sector, you're only in the private sector. And as I told you, that in the higher levels of the corporate sector, there are only 3% Muslims, which means that Muslims are not in the formal sector. They are basically in the informal sector of the economy. They're not in the government, they're not in the corporate world, they're right down there in informal sector, and their guarantees of economic sustainability are very, very low, especially during COVID circumstances. Businesses are down and Muslims are suffering more than anybody else in India as a result of COVID. What can we do? The future of India will be determined by Indians, Hindus, Muslims, and others. They have to reach a consensus. All these communities have to come together and have a common vision of what kind of India they want to live in. If they don't have a shared vision, then there will be contestations, there will be divisions, and the country will continue to suffer. There will be social disharmony, there will be riots, violence, and essentially the biggest consequence of that will be economic disempowerment of the minorities, and also inability of India itself to grow at the pace it can potentially do. So India as a country will fail to realize its economic potential if it does not put its social and political issues in order. As American Muslims, we can provide some relief and we can do a few more things, but you must keep this much in mind, that there are about maybe 200,000 Indian Muslims in America, and there are 200 million Muslims in India. So relatively speaking, we can do little, but what we can focus on is to provide relief. Alhamdulillah, the American Muslim community is very well off. So I would recommend that all our zakat, all our charities, etc., for some time be dedicated to Indian Muslims, especially during this COVID period, where they are going to be the biggest victims of the negative consequences of COVID on the economy in India as compared to other communities. So the first thing that we can do is provide relief, financial aid, and all other kinds of support that we can potentially do. So basically give through IMRC and other institutions so that Indian Muslims may be able to come out better through this pandemic. The second thing we can do is amplify the voice of Indian Muslims. We can provide platforms to them here and all over the world so that they can talk to the rest of the world and build alliances about what's happening to them. India has global ambitions. India wants to be a global power. India wants to be recognized by the world as a great nation. It wants to become a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. But India can't continue to aspire for these things without being a good citizen of the world. And being a good citizen of the world would mean treating its minorities well. And if India continues to oppress its Muslim minorities, then it definitely does not deserve the reputation of a good global citizen. And so by giving forums to Indian Muslims and amplifying their voice, Indian Muslims in the diaspora can essentially help Indian Muslims at least speak up about their situation. We can also share our experiences here. We live in Alhamdulillah, a reasonably safe democracy where, yes, there are racism and oppression, but the Indian Muslims and Muslims in general haven't experienced that in spite of talks of Muslim ban and others. So we can share our experience about how interfaith, secularity, pluralism, etc. continues to allow religious communities who are in minority to thrive. The experiences that we gain from essentially a pluralistic culture is something that we need to transfer back into India. We can also identify the best practices for Muslim institutions, especially in the arena of outreach to government, outreach to media, and outreach to other faith communities. This is what we can do. I'm going to end my discussion, but before I end, I want to leave you with one saying by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he said, beware of the cry of the oppressed. Beware of the cry of the oppressed, because there is no hijab, there is no distance, there is no partition between Allah and those who are oppressed. And I want to give this comfort to Indian Muslims who feel as if they are unsafe in India and that they are being oppressed, is to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves hearts that are broken, and those who are oppressed, their voices will be heard. But while we wait for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make his intervention, I invite all Indian Muslims in the United States, those who are here at ISNA, and those who are not also from India, to recognize the challenges that Indian Muslims face and try to do their best in helping them and trying to help them both politically to preserve their civil rights and their properties and their lives, and also to help them economically so they can essentially survive this tremendous economic devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Muqtadir. I now welcome our second speaker, Harsh Mander. Harsh has been a long-time friend, advocate, and a partner of IMRC work. He worked for 2 decades in the Indian Administrative Services and has been a long activist working to secure the right to food, land, and housing rights, as well as the right to health in India. He is currently the director of Center of Equity Studies and founder of Caravan of Love, a civilian campaign in India in solidarity with the victims of mob lynching and communal violence.
Friends, we are gathered here speaking to each other from two opposite sides of the planet, really. But we are gathered here reflecting on this moment in the journey of the Indian Republic. India is passing through a very difficult moment in its history. At stake is indeed the very soul of this nation. At stake is what is finest in its civilizational legacy, in the struggles of the freedom movement, and indeed in the pledges of our constitution of justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. The central contestation that we're seeing India, which is in ferment, in turmoil, is one of belonging. Who belongs to this country, and who does this country belong to? And most of all, it is about the place in India of India's 200 million Muslim citizens. This isn't a new battle. It is one that dates back at least 100 years. It was about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years, when Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa, and he took leadership assumed the leadership of our freedom struggle. This freedom struggle was never a battle only against British colonialism. It was also a battle at its core about what kind of India we would build when the British left, and indeed who would this country, this newly independent country, belong to. In Gandhiji's leadership, the majority of people in India of every faith made one resolve during this period, and that resolve was that India would be a country that would belong equally to all its citizens, regardless of their faith and their identity. It would not matter which God you worship, or if you worship no God. It would not matter what your caste was, what your language you spoke, what clothes you wore, what you ate, who you loved. You had your freedom to be yourself and still belong equally to this nation. This was an idea which the majority of Indians believed in, which is why Gandhiji's leadership was so influential. But it was not an uncontested idea. Exactly around 100 years ago, we saw the creation and the rise of the Hindu Mahasabha, and in 1925 of the RSS. And they had a different idea for India completely. They said India was a Hindu nation of its Hindu majority. The majority was actually an ephemeral idea, because the caste Hindu was not really the majority in this country. But the idea of a Hindu nation in which Muslims and Christians in particular and less obviously Dalits and Adivasis, would be allowed to live, but only as second-class citizens. The RSS was deeply influenced, indeed, by Hitler in their texts, and his militant homogenizing form of nationalism. There was, in this battle, there was also in the 1940s a third path that was emerging of the Muslim League, and the Muslim League said that India was not one country; it was two countries, and a Hindu Hindustan and a Muslim Pakistan, and they demanded, therefore, the partition of our country, which was finally, as we all know, was what finally came about. India was partitioned amidst catastrophic violence, communal violence. 1 million people lost their lives in Hindu-Muslim violence, and more than 14 million, 15 million people were displaced from their homes, uprooted. My own family was among them. My parents were raised in Rawalpindi, and they were among, and my extended family were among the refugees who came into India. This was a period of enormous pain and trauma and tumult, but it was in also some ways, I think, our finest moment in the freedom struggle. When India was, became free in 1947 on 15th August, Mahatma Gandhi was not among us here in Delhi. He was instead in Calcutta, trying to where there was enormous bloodshed and killings, Hindu-Muslim riots at their peak, and he went on an epic 40-day fast in order to restore peace, and at the end of 40 days, peace did return to Calcutta. And Lord Mountbatten at that time said that what my 55,000 armed soldiers could not accomplish in Punjab, this one man with his frail body did accomplish alone. And he was, after that, he had planned to go to Pakistan without a visa and to talk about brotherhood and sisterhood between us. But when he reached Delhi, he found Delhi, torn apart by hate in the same way. Tens and thousands of refugees, like my own family, had come, and they were angry and sullen. They had lost their loved ones. Trainloads were coming, with everybody massacred in both directions. And in this time, India could have gone with a different leadership into saying, into India choosing to become a mirror of Pakistan, a Muslim Pakistan and a Hindu India. But Gandhiji's last battle was indeed for this idea of equal citizenship, of equal belonging. And Anis Kidwai, in her memoirs, writes her husband had got killed during the riots, trying to save lives, and she had come as a widow. She didn't go through the period of iddat. She came to Gandhiji in Delhi and said, "I needed to be here at this time to see how I could serve our people." And she said, recalls that Gandhiji was very, very sad and dismayed, and he said one thing which he recalled. She said, "Beti, mera काम तब तक पूरा नहीं होगा जब तक इस शहर में एक मुस्लिम बच्चा बिना डर के खेल ना सके, चल ना सके. My work will not be complete here until a Muslim child cannot walk without fear in this city." And that is, that was his last battle. He repeatedly told the Indian Muslims that this country belongs equally to you. Maulana Azad stood on the ramparts of Jama Masjid in Delhi and said, "I'm proud. I'm proud to be a Muslim. I'm proud to be an Indian. Both these parts of my identity cannot be separated in any way. I will not give up either of these of my identities." And Gandhiji's last fast, just 2 weeks before he was assassinated, was for this idea of an India of equal belonging and equal citizenship. The angry refugees who had come in and the Hindu Mahasabha, what they had done was they had planted idols in the Connaught Place Mosque in Delhi and in the Mehroli Dargah. And Gandhiji said that my Hindu faith will be emptied of any meaning if it is, if a place of worship is built on disrespect to another faith, and that the mosque and the dargah must be returned with full respect. And also his second major demand was that a lot of the refugees had driven out the Muslim residents from their homes in Delhi and taken over their homes. And he said, I want that we should return, call back the Muslim residents and give them back their homes and say, this is your home, this is your country, and go back to the refugee camps. And by the fifth day, there were 1 lakh people on the streets supporting Gandhi's demands, and the people, the government, and the Hindu Mahasabha had all were compelled to accept all of his demands. And that is why I believe that was in some ways our finest, most painful, but still our finest moment, because it was his demonstration, Gandhiji's demonstration of what radical love means, what a country of equal belonging means. And 2 weeks later, an assassin pumped 3 bullets into his body during a prayer meeting. But his vision for India influenced people in this country. Jawaharlal Nehru said this country would belong to every person who regards this as their own. And that was what was written into our constitution, the drafting committee led by Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And we have one of the finest constitutions in the world, in which this resolve was written in. In the limited time I have, let me jump across almost 70 years into the India of today. And we truly have come a very long way from the promises Mahatma Gandhi, when he said, "My work will not be done until a Muslim child cannot walk without fear." And we see in India, with mounting fear and hate, driven from the very top. The RSS, we're living at a time when all the top constitutional positions actually, the Prime Minister, the President, the Vice President, the Speaker, are all men who have spent much of their life as members of the RSS, deeply wedded to a very different imagination for India. Mr. Modi, when he came in 2014, it was not as though the decline hadn't begun. It had begun much earlier, and successive governments of the Congress as well after Jawaharlal Nehru have contributed to the erosion of that idea of India, and many betrayals. But these last 6 years with Mr. Modi have pushed India into a completely different direction. There is no attempt to hide now the open and extreme hostility that our rulers today have to India's Muslims, and indeed to what the Constitution has promised them. I see three parts to this project. There was a political part which attempted to establish the political irrelevance of the Indian Muslim. Political scientists had said that Muslims form a significant part of the population in a large number of constituencies, and therefore on an openly anti-Muslim platform, a party will not be able to get a majority on its own. And Mr. Modi has demonstrated it is possible by uniting everybody across caste, but also across religion, making alliances even in many places with the Christian community against the Indian Muslim. And through that, the Muslim has become politically irrelevant. And even the so-called secular parties are more and more hesitant to raise their issues and to put up Muslim candidates. The BJP has not put up a single candidate and doesn't have a single Muslim member of parliament in the Lok Sabha and the lower house. Then there was a social project, and the social project was one of normalizing hatred to an extreme. And we saw this particularly reflected in a campaign of lynching, very similar to what we saw in over 60 years since the late 19th century in America against the African Americans. Performative, very cruel attacks in the name of cow protection or so-called love jihad. And that was the social project of normalizing, making hatred and bigotry against the Muslims a normal part of our social life. And then, and in response to that, my colleagues, I made a call for, to fight hate. You cannot fight hate with hate. You can only fight it with love, with the kind of radical love based on extreme courage and conviction that Mahatma Gandhi had demonstrated to us. And indeed, his finest follower, Martin Luther King, had demonstrated in the civil rights movement in the US. I believe that we had to fight hate with love. And I made a call for what we called Caravan of Love, or a Caravan of Love. And we resolved that we would go to every home where anyone had been lynched to say that we stand together, you're not alone. And we seek forgiveness for what you have suffered. And we stand with you in your battles for justice. When Mr. Modi got re-elected in 2019, he believed that he now had a mandate to go beyond both the political and social project and have a formal legislative transformation of India into a Hindu nation. And very quickly we saw what happened in Kashmir. We also saw the triple talaq law, which criminalized triple talaq. We saw the judgment of the Supreme Court on the Ram Temple. And then, perhaps as the crowning glory came the amendment to the citizenship laws of the country, which for the first time made a differentiation based on religion, religious identity. And it was a moment where in effect, that law of just 1,000 words subverted everything that the Constitution stood for. The country burst out in unexpected protests. In fact, the biggest protests, non-violent protests that the country has seen since independence. And very fine, it was led in many places by working class Muslim women who actually were at the very forefront of this movement, and by students across campuses around the country. And there was a celebration of the Constitution itself, which was read out in each of these rallies. The symbols of the struggle were the national flag and the national anthem, and it underlined most of all the importance of solidarity. But then we saw it suddenly came to a halt. Firstly, because there was terrible violence in Delhi itself, the biggest Hindu-Muslim violence that we've seen after partition in the city. And this was followed by the pandemic, and that was being used to completely crush the movement, and it has been used to criminalize the participants in the movement who have been, some of them have been arrested, a lot of them are being interrogated, and even my name has appeared in a number of charge sheets, and they've spoken about a speech that I gave, and I'll end with that speech that I gave in Jamia Millia University to the students. The next day after the police had entered and beaten up students, there was huge anguish, and the students said they wanted me to talk to them. And in my address, I said basically three things. Firstly, that this was not a fight just against a law, but about the country that we will leave for our children. It was a fight for the Constitution, and it was a fight for love. I said that, I said that India's Muslims should not henceforward allow anyone to ask them to prove their love for this country. I said that the rest of us in 1947, like my own family, had no other country to choose from. But the Indian Muslim, your ancestors, your grandparents, your parents had a choice, and they chose an India based on the idea of equal respect for all faiths over a Muslim Pakistan. So you are Indian by choice. The rest of us are just Indian by chance. So if anyone has demonstrated their love for this country, it is India's Muslims. And last of all, I said that this battle has to be fought, will not be won either in Parliament, where the political parties have not shown the moral courage. It will not be won in the Supreme Court, which is not, by many judgments, has not stood with the minorities and their rights. It will be fought by we, the people of India, on the streets with non-violence. But I said, most of all, will be fought in a fourth place, and that is in my heart and in your heart. It will be fought by what will decide is whether we've allowed hate and fear to colonize our hearts, or whether We have fought these away and located in our hearts love for each other. Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And he reminded us that we are all tied in a single garment of destiny. He also said, "The arc of justice is long, but in the arc of history is long, but in the end it bends towards justice. And it will bend towards justice if we are able to restore love and respect for everyone of every faith as equal citizens in our hearts." Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh. Now we have a short video about our COVID relief work. Now our next speaker is Owaisi Sahab. I am happy to introduce Asaduddin Owaisi from Hyderabad, who is the president of All India Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin. He is four-time member of the parliament. Please welcome Asaduddin Owaisi.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. It is a great honor has been bestowed on me to speak in the ISNA convention. I thank Janab Manzoor Ghori Sahab for giving me this invitation to speak on the conditions and the present problems of Indian Muslims. Dr. Manzoor Ghori and his organization, IMRC, have done tremendous charitable and humanitarian work in India, and I hope that he continues with his humanitarian activities. For context, it must be noted that the ruling party, Bharatiya Janata Party, was elected for a second term last year. BJP is part of a larger movement known as Hindutva. Its founders in the early 1900s were expressly inspired by the ideas of fatherland and racial supremacy espoused by the Nazis and fascists in Europe at that time. Since its founding, the BJP has run on a majoritarian Hindu nationalist plank that seeks to turn India from a secular constitutional republic to a Hindu Rashtra or a Hindu state. Hindutva is rabidly anti-Muslim, and the BJP has repeatedly mobilized public opinion against Muslim citizens. Its agenda has consistently sought to marginalize Muslims in India further and to deny them the rights to equal citizenship. To this end, it began a movement to reclaim temples and which were perceived to have been demolished and replaced by medieval Muslim emperors. On 1992 6 December, the movement demolished a masjid known as Babari Masjid. The movement falsely claimed that the land was actually a sacred plot where Lord Ram was believed to have taken birth. Last year, the Supreme Court rewarded the people who demolished the masjid by giving them the right to establish a temple on the land where masjid stood for 450 years. This year, the Prime Minister of India participated in the temple's inaugural ceremony. I have said at that time that my Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, by attending the inaugural foundation laying ceremony of a Ram temple, which was demolished by BJP leaders who are facing criminal charges for demolition of the masjid, the Prime Minister, by attending this foundation laying ceremony, had violated his oath. The Prime Minister has violated the secularism of this country, which is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. The above is an example of accelerated majoritarianism in India. Muslims who lost a masjid to vandalism, desecration, and eventual demolition could not even expect that their rights would be respected. Instead, the whole dispute was treated as a symbol to humiliate Muslims for the perceived historical wrongs committed by their ancestors. When the Prime Minister went to participate in the ceremony, the message was that a conqueror has righted past wrongs and showed Muslims their place. Yes, as an Indian Muslim, we respect and accept the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court of India is the final apex court. But as a retired, famous, late Supreme Court judge has said, that the Supreme Court is supreme but not infallible. May I also bring to your notice the anti-Muslim agenda, which was previously used only to mobilize the majority during elections. However, Mr. Modi's government has fulfilled its promises on most divisive issues. For example, the state of Jammu and Kashmir enjoyed nominal constitutional autonomy under India's federal system. Many other states and provinces in India enjoy similar levels of autonomy. But the fact that J&K is a Muslim majority state meant that BJP will mete out severe humiliation to the people of state. A year ago, Modi government stripped the state of its autonomy, bifurcated it, and converted into a federally governed territories. The Modi government maintains one of the largest troop presence in the erstwhile state of J&K. For over a year, the Kashmiri people have lived with severe restrictions to normal life. For over a year, 8 million people have been forced to live without any modern means of communication, having to sometimes depend on landlines to communicate with each other. In parallel, the Modi government has also sought to tinker with India's citizenship laws. Previous India citizenship was based on birth, naturalization, and descent. The ruling party enacted a law known as CAA, which explicitly excludes Muslim refugees from becoming citizens. Furthermore, the government sought to introduce a national register of citizens, which would require Indian citizens to prove their citizenship through documentation. Those who do not possess such evidence are likely to be marked as doubtful citizens. May I bring to your notice an example which happened in Assam. An NRC was done in Assam under the express supervision of the Honorable Supreme Court. The final list which came out excluded 2 million people. Now, in that 500,000 were Muslims. The BJP government is in Assam, in the state of Assam, and they say that we will give citizenship to all the 1.5 non-Muslims under the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was passed by the Indian Parliament, and we will not give it to the Muslims of Assam. Muslims of Assam, whose names have been excluded, nearly 500,000, they will have to file their cases to prove the Indian citizenship in the Foreigners Tribunal. However, now this is discrimination. However, non-Muslims, as I said, will have the protection of CAA, while Muslims will remain doubtful citizens. In response to the CAA Act, Muslims participated in widespread protests and demanded the withdrawal of any law that provided citizenship on the basis of religion. Muslims in India Indian Muslims face systemic and structural discrimination. They are poorest religious group, and their poverty has only increased with each generation. Despite the economic and social discrimination, Indian Muslims resisted the law in extremely peaceful, democratic manner. However, the ruling party response was to use state machinery to persecute Muslims. In Uttar Pradesh, the most populous state of the country, dozens of Muslims were killed by police and hundreds were tortured and harassed for protesting against the law. In the capital city, New Delhi, Muslim women set up sit-ins in their neighborhoods against the law. While the American president was visiting India, members of the ruling party incited a full-blown massacre against Muslims in the capital city of New Delhi. Over 50 people were killed. Majority of them were Indian Muslims, and hundreds lost their properties, Hindus and Muslims, in targeted acts of arson and loot. Furthermore, over 16 masjids, madrasas, and religious structures of Muslims are also desecrated. The message was to teach Muslims a lesson. And what a lesson was taught to Muslims. Let me give an example of the death of Faizan. This death of Faizan can be compared to George Floyd's death in your country. When George Floyd was killed by the police, America erupted. People came out in hundreds and thousands for George Floyd's justice. But I didn't see that for Muhammad Faizan, a 23-year-old Muslim in my home country. This is the travesty. How is it that a same Faizan who was beaten up along with 4 Muslim boys, their jaws were broken and they were told to recite a national anthem while they were in pain, and not a single Delhi police officer has yet been arrested. Muslims were taught a lesson. By whom? By my Indian Prime Minister's government, which controls the law and order in Delhi. While another example of what is happening, while a global pandemic had begun in the rest of the world, Mr. Modi's government was busy enabling violence against its minorities and dismissing that the pandemic had begun. Reprisals against the anti-CAA protesters did not stop with the violence. In northeast Delhi, police have picked up activists and organizers of protest for instigating pogrom. Protesters in other states too have been picked up and imprisoned under the draconian UAPA anti-terror laws. These laws permit imprisonment of any person with minimum judicial recourse. Meanwhile, the actual instigators of the crime have not even been investigated, let alone prosecuted. While most other countries were focused on using community solidarity to deal with the pandemic, the government of India and its media, pliable media, are focused on shifting the blame of the pandemic onto the Muslims. The government chose to blame Tablighi Jamaat for organizing a religious meet. However, during the same period, the ruling party had neither imposed any restriction nor had it itself begun avoiding large crowds. However, for weeks together, the Tablighi Jamaat was blamed for spreading the virus and becoming a super spreader. Dog whistle politics and propaganda created an atmosphere where majority Hindus were urged to boycott Muslim vegetable hawkers. The demonization of Muslims was such that a man chose to commit suicide while common Muslims had to face mob violence. Muslim pregnant women were refused treatment in Jharkhand. In Rajasthan, one woman lost her child because of it, and another woman died after multiple hospitals in UP refused treatment. The above is a snippet only of the last few months of November 2009, from 2019 onwards. Muslims have been demonized, humiliated and persecuted. They have faced pogroms, mob violence and scapegoating. It is only a reflection of how dangerous it has become to be an Indian Muslim in the government of Mr. Modi. India's majoritarians so entrenched that a certain class of the country is now eager to blame Muslims for all the ills that ail our society. Instead of embracing the rule of law and social justice, Indian elections have now become contests to demonstrate who is a bigger Hindu. May I also point out to you that it is high time that Indian Muslims should now rethink, introspect what should be done. They should, in my opinion, come forward and become masters of their political destiny. They must actively participate in politics, not only to vote, but to get themselves elected. Their representation number must go up in the Indian Parliament, in the state legislature, where that is the way of ensuring that this discrimination, injustice can be controlled and justice can be done, which Indian Constitution provides to us. There is a myth that the Indian Muslims are part of a global ummah. That is broken. That is broken. No country, no organization. Where are they? I am not saying this to patronize the Indian Muslims, but it is a fact. And the reality also is that we understand, we know that when our forefathers took a decision that we will not go to Pakistan because India is our country, India will remain our country. This is a land where I have a history of 1,000 years. I have a legacy of 1,000 years. We participated as Muslims in the freedom struggle of this country. We stood shoulder to shoulder with our Hindu brethren. We stood under the leadership of Gandhi, Nehru, Maulana Azad, Rahmatullah alayh. We participated and gave lives in thousands in the 1875 War of Independence. This is our country. It will continue to remain our country. I know for a fact that this is a long night, but inshallah ta'ala, after every long night, there will be a dawn. And I am sure that there are majority of Hindus who believe in the beauty of India. The beauty of India is its diversity, is its pluralism, which the Constitution talks about: liberty, equality, fraternity and justice. And I am sure that everyone who believes in the beauty of India will stand together and a new dawn will happen. Many people from US ask me about that USCIRF, UNHRC, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch. See, I don't want to comment on that. They are still compiling reports while we know what is happening on the ground. Let me also point out to you, when people ask me that what is the way forward, I would only tell you that the way forward is to protect India's pluralism and diversity, which the India's Constitution has guaranteed to every Indian citizen. And I am sure that with all the Indians who believe in this, strength and beauty will come together, unite and ensure that we have an India of the dreams of our forefathers when they got independence in 1947, 15th of August. I hope, and I'm sure that I will live to see that day. But history will remember us that when we were opposing this fascist government, it is not only for our existence, but to protect India, to make India stronger. Whether we succeed or not is a different thing. Alhamdulillah, I have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have firm faith in my countrymen who are Hindus, who are Christians, who are Sikhs, who are Dalits, who are weaker section. And we are not worried. And inshallah ta'ala, in a democratic way, in a non-violent way, we will continue to protest. We will continue to fight in a democratic way for our constitutional rights. History should remember us that we were the ones who stood up against such fascism, against such parochial politics which is happening in my home country. I am not concerned about the result. I am not concerned about whether we will be victorious or not. History will judge us. But I am reminded that we are in month of Muharram, that the sacrifices of Imam Hussain and Ahl Bayt give us hope, give us strength that inshallah ta'ala, no matter how strong the government is, no matter how strong Mr. Modi's party is, the truth cannot be changed. The oppressed cannot become oppressor. The victims cannot become accused. And I have firm faith in India's Constitution that this long night would end. I urge you to remember us in your du'as. And this is the only thing that we require from you. We require your du'as. And inshallah ta'ala, this great country of Gandhi, Buddha, Khaja Gharib Nawaz, which is its diversity, it is beauty, inshallah ta'ala, we will have India of our hopes and dreams. Please make dua for us. I once again thank you for inviting me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.